Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting Education Committee to order. Let the record show it is 2 p.m. and that we are meeting at 1747 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California. I am the chair of the Education Committee. I am Bernice Baste Martinez, a public appointee to the board, as well as I serve as vice president of the board. To my right and your left is my colleague, Ken Maxey, who's
an appointee of the speaker. Welcome, everyone.
And then we want to introduce the board staff. And we have with us today our newly appointed executive officer, appointed by the governor. Welcome, Elaine Yamaguchi. Do you have a few words for us?
Very few, because I know you have a big agenda. Greetings, everybody. My name is Elaine Yamaguchi. This is, for the record, day 4 for me in this job. Still very, very excited about it. I wanted to thank, of course, Department of Consumer Affairs, Secretary Podesta, and the governor for giving me this great opportunity. I'm so excited to work with this group. You know, the board members have all been so great. And, you know, like I said, this is day 4 for me, but I have to tell you, there's some really amazing people who work for the board. And like I said, I'm really excited for the prospect today.
Oh, my. Thank you. And then we have other staff with us, and we're going to let them introduce themselves.
I can speak pretty loud.
Into the mic, please, or else it will not record. And people looking in won't hear you either.
Hello, everyone. I'm Margarita Valdez. I'm one of the NECs.
I'm Jessica Gomez, one of the NECs.
I'm Geraldine Maracino, Education Analyst in the Education Division.
Thank you. And we also have our legal representative with us. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Kenneth L. Swenson, Senior Staff Counsel, Attorney 3, Legal Counsel for the Board.
Thank you. We want to commence with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I ask Ken, our attorney, to please lead us. Everyone stand.
Attention. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Ken. Our next order of business is the introduction of approved schools represented at the meeting if they voluntarily signed in. I was just notified no one signed, but I see lots of representatives that are here. And so if you would be kind enough to introduce, or is there a list now?
Yeah, there is.
I need the list or else I can't introduce them. Thank you. Thank you very much. By signing, that means you are willing to be introduced. And so by school, if you'll just stand so that you can be recognized. We have Concord College. Welcome. We have the president of the vocational nursing directors of Southern California. I think I should put my glasses on. That would make better. Thank you. Institute of Technology. Welcome. Unitech College. Welcome. Are there any others present that did not actually sign? Wonderful. Happy New Year, everyone. We are very pleased that you're all here, and we want to get on with the business of the Education Committee. The first item is the discussion and possible action to make recommendations regarding the Institute of Technology in Modesto. And will the NEC please approach and give us some background on the school?
Ms. Paula Richards is here. She is the director. The Institute of Technology Modesto started the first program in 2015. Their first graduates were in late 2016. No, yes, they had no candidates in 2016. In 2017, they still had no candidates. They were then approved to start classes. Last classes which they initiated and they were approved for was in March of 2017, in which they implemented a new curriculum and several changes because of the results of their evaluation of what was occurring with their students and their state board passing. That class will be graduating April 2018. In July of 2017, they requested a class to start. It was approved July 27th to start July 30th of 2017. Due to the fact that the faculty and staff really looked internally and made a decision not to start that class because they had just begun with the new curriculum, the class in March, and they requested if they could move that class to November. At that time, there was supposed to be no issue with it. We wrote the report. The report was reviewed. The class was denied due to the continued state board passings. And so a letter was sent to Ms. Richards that it had been recommended she would come to the Education Committee. She is presently here. That she would come to the education for consideration of being on provisional status. I did communicate with her. We have been in discussions, and she is here.
And the recommendation from staff is?
To provisional,
Okay.
to provide them the time to compile the data necessary to evaluate the changes that they have made and to do the provisional. The recommendation had been for 1 year, but if you really think that their first stats will not come out possibly until the third quarter of this year, probably July, September. And then if they get in a class, it wouldn't be until later. It should be approximately, my recommendation is 2 years. So that they have time. It does not keep them from improving or getting approval for other classes, but it gives them the opportunity.
Thank you. And the representative from the school, will you please join us and introduce yourself, please? Good afternoon. Yes, please.
Yes, I believe it's on.
My name is Paula Richards.
And if you'll talk directly into the mic, yes, thank you.
Is it on? Is it on?
Is it on? There should be a button to push.
Okay,
Okay.
it's on. All right. My name is Paula Richards. I'm the Director of Nursing at the Modesto campus of Institute of Technology. Thank you, respected board members, for allowing me to tell you about Institute of Technology's plan for improvement of our NCLEX pass rates. At Institute of Technology, we are committed to helping our students achieve their career goals by providing them a high-quality educational program. So when our first classes pass rates were low, we immediately began making changes. because that was unacceptable to us. These included things like a complete revision of our curriculum, going to a concept-based curriculum, and we revised that curriculum and we implemented it in March of 2017 on all of our campuses. The first cohort of students that were enrolled with the new curriculum is not scheduled to graduate until the second quarter of 2018. We increased our minimum entrance requirements from a PSB score, which is our entrance exam, from 40 to a minimum of 45, and the SLE score was increased to 20. This will be further increased with the new class that we are asking to have so that we can implement these changes and gather data. Will be further increased to 50 for proposed students. Looking at all of our graduates that we had previously, had we had the stricter standard, our pass rates would have been 73% because those people who failed would not have been admitted to the program in the first place. We rewrote our attendance policy, which was fairly lenient, to decrease the number of days where a student can be absent. And we strictly enforce that now. They may only miss 2 days in a semester, or they will be dropped from the program. Raised our passing exam scores from 70% when we first started to 75%, and we require remediation of all exams that are less than 80%. We provided additional NCLEX review courses for those students that had graduated and failed. We didn't abandon them. We paid for an NCLEX review course for them to help them on their second attempt. We increased early identification and tutoring services offered for all of our students, recognizing them early on as those that are at risk. We continue to self-monitor and assess the needs of our vocational nursing program each semester, updating as appropriate. Our latest changes, which we would like to implement with this new start, is emphasizing instructor development. We have purchased we have had nursing summits, 2-day nursing summits for all of the nursing instructors from all of our campuses. And we've also required faculty development webinars that are focused on teaching methodologies, classroom conceptual learning, and classroom management. Implementing a new entrance examination, which will be predictive of a student's success in the program. And we are also implementing a comprehensive assessment and progressive testing program that utilizes progression testing, adaptive quizzing, and structured remediation programs as a predictor of student success on the NCLEX. As Ms. Valdez said, we had requested a July start, which was approved by the board, but we felt we were not ready at that point to start a class. And we requested that that be delayed, then that approved class be allowed to start in November. Subsequently, other students had taken the NCLEX, and when they too performed poorly based on the old curriculum, then our request was denied. We continue to search for all ways that we can do better on the exams. We've done a complete comprehensive literature search. We've talked to other schools. I've bent Ms. Valdez's ear a lot on what we can do, and we are committed to do whatever is necessary to improve our NCLEX pass rates. So we appreciate the board's position on protecting the public, but we too want to protect our students as well. And so we accept provisional status. And we do request that we be able to start a class in March based on all of these new changes so that we can actually demonstrate to you that these changes are going to improve our pass rates.
Yes, Ms. Valdez.
Ms. Richards did send me the request. She sent me all the documents requesting the March class. Another point I'd like to bring up is that we have been communicating. The last state boards did show that they went up 9 points for the students that took it. The other ones, for all the students, the other ones failed, but it doesn't give them credit if they take it the second time, even though they are remediating them and assisting them so that they succeed in passing the exam so they get their license. I understand her position. I do see all the things she's put in there. It would be difficult for her, even on provisional, to gather the data if she has no students and wait just for this. I know we have to look at each school individually. And so at this point, I would encourage to approve a starting of a class, maybe not with all 30 students, but to give them the opportunity to demonstrate all these things that they have been put in place.
So if we're hearing you correctly, these are a couple of changes or
Yes.
additions to your report.
Yes, your report, when it was moved that way into it, and I was not able to add changes. So I'm saying them verbally at this time. Yes, she has agreed, she has no issues with the provisional.
The school has no
No
issues
issues with
with
it or the time. She is requesting the class. Because of all the things, and I saw that they improved 9 points from the previous one. The last one we got on the last quarter was 9 points higher, better than the previous one, the one October, December. It's not on the report either, but I have them with me. And I would recommend a start of a class, but not necessarily with the 30 students.
Thank
To give
you.
them the opportunity.
Any questions from my colleague?
None. Thank you very much, Mrs. Richards.
Thank you.
Don't go, Ms. Richards. We hear the NEC is recommending the possibility of a new class, but not the full size as requested. What size class would be acceptable to your school?
Well, I understand with decreasing the class size, it would give the opportunity for instructors to have more one-on-one time with the student. Obviously, we need to weigh that with the cost of running and providing instructors and keeping them busy. I believe that we would be acceptable for a class size of 25.
Additionally, you shared with us that the school is working with those students who were admitted under your old criteria.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding. With the new criteria, these are students that would never have been in class.
Correct.
So at this point, they potentially could become licensed LVNs. Is that correct?
The previous students?
Well, if I heard you correctly, you mentioned you've changed the criteria for admission as one of the changes you've made.
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe I heard a reference to some of the students who were admitted now under those old guidelines would not meet all of the criteria of the new guidelines. Did I understand that correctly?
No, what I did was I went back
Mm-hmm.
and I looked at all of our previous students.
Yes.
And compared what their entrance exams were
Mm-hmm.
and the results of whether they had passed or failed and succeeded in passing the NCLEX exam.
Okay.
And what I realized was that our entrance exam was really too low. Okay,
Your entrance exam for admission
yes.
to
For the
your
minimum
school,
score
to your program.
was 40, which was too low. So in making a recommendation for increasing the score on the entrance exam, what I did was I plotted out everybody's PSB and SLE scores and whether they had passed or failed, and realized that if we had kept the class size only with those more stringent admission standards, our pass rates would have been 73%. Because we wouldn't have admitted those students that failed.
Then if I'm hearing you correctly, there were some students that are actually graduates or will graduate with those lower entrance scores.
All of the students that have been on the old curriculum
Yes.
with the lower entrance scores have already graduated.
And some are out practicing, or they will be helped to prepare for
If they
testing.
successfully pass the NCLEX exams, they will become LVNs.
I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Yes.
Ms. Martinez, they did institute including the admissions with the March class. What she did was all the previous ones, she did all the studies and said, oh, if they had come into this, under this, they would not have been in the class.
Okay.
But those new policies, including the admissions, were the ones for the March of 2017.
So they have been implemented.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Additionally, how many of those from the previous classes from the old criterion are still being helped? And you don't have to give an exact number. Is it maybe 5%, 1%, none?
At this time, we've helped everybody who has, we're continuing to offer NCLEX preparation classes. The number of students who participate and come and get that guidance and help in studying fluctuates, but I'd say we're still helping 10% of those students.
So, in conclusion, with the new standards, if there would have been an admitted class in March, they would be with this higher expectation, correct?
I'm not
Yes.
sure I understood.
You've changed your admission requirements. We have
Yes.
focused on March.
Yes.
You've asked for a class originally in July.
Right.
They would have to meet the higher standards.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And we were still talking about a class to be admitted. There's been multiple delays. But I just want some sense of this group would also be held to those new standards. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Any further comments from either? Okay. Can we anticipate getting an updated report in time for the February board meeting?
Yes.
And based on the discussion here, we would anticipate that report would include the new past data. It would also address the recommendation for some size of a class, with a rationale for a lesser number than what was requested?
Yes.
Would there be anything else we could anticipate in that report?
And the approval of provisional status for 2 years. The report would, consideration of provisional status for 2 years, consideration of request to admit a class smaller and the rationale, and to put in the latest quarter of the NCLEX, and to provide the rationale and the occurrences in sequence. Yes,
Thank you,
and you will have it before.
thank you. Is there a motion to make a recommendation to the full board at the February meeting solely based on receiving an updated report from staff?
So moved, Madam Chair.
And I will second that. Any discussion?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Mrs. Richard, for your presentation today, and it seems like you were on the right track with your school. And just keep up the good work, and I look forward to making that vote with the full board in February.
Great, thank
And
you.
I would ask Ms. Richard to send me that paper with everything on it.
And because we have a motion on the floor, is there any public comment? Seeing none, I'm gonna call for the vote. Mr. Maxey? Aye. Carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next order of business is a discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board regarding current and prospective practice of entry-level licensed vocational nurses and psychiatric technicians as defined by board stakeholders, information focused on practice sites and preparations. Will staff please come forward?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Will you introduce yourself and then give us your report?
My name is Jessica Gomez. I'm a nursing education consultant with the BVNPT. A small background of how we got the data was the education committee asked for the NECs or a subcommittee to go out and reach out to the stakeholders of the BVNPT programs, who would be the program directors, the LVNs, and clinical site managers and directors, and to find out, number one, where the students are working and how prepared they are when they start working as an LVN. And so we had 4 sessions. We broke them up into 2 sessions, one in the south and north, and then another one in the south and north. We did have a board representative just there to listen to what was being said during these meetings. During these meetings, we had 19 to 28 attendees at each meeting, which was a fairly good representative of our stakeholders. The information that we found out is that VNs are starting to be able to work in the hospitals. It's starting to open up. So where we're hearing that LVNs are not in the hospitals, we heard that there's several hospitals that are opening up to the LVN being float nurses, to be covering their breaks and working in the urgent care areas, covering the patients who are psych holds, and making sure that they are being taken care of until they can find placement for the psychiatric patients. We found out that the psychiatric technicians, some of their positions are being lost due to the closures of the mental health hospitals. However, the community does seem to be picking up a lot of the patients, and so we're seeing a lot of community outreach and places where the psych tech students can take care of these patients and can get employment. with this analysis, I picked up the wrong one. With this analysis, we also found out that there is a disconnect between what some of the facilities are feeling about the preparation of the LVN and what the schools are putting out. Schools are teaching the students very well how to take care of 2 or 3 patients, but when they get out working in their first site, they're passing medications on 15 to 20 patients. And so there is quite a disconnect there. And the facilities are asking that there be more reality added to the schooling, that this is something that needs to be added. Another consensus from the facilities is that the students are lacking some soft skills in communication, that they are having a hard time making conversations with physicians and other staff members, with directors. Ethics is another problem, and being able to build boundaries between patient and personal relationships was another issue that was found that they were having. One of the other areas that we discussed was the NCLEX testing and the preparation for the students for the NCLEX testing. And the programs are continuing to ask for information on how the students are doing when they, if they fail, why are they failing? The board does not get the information about why students fail. What we get is information on who failed and when. And so we're not able to give some of the information that the schools would be asking for anyway. They can purchase this information through Mountain Measurements, which is through the NCSBN, who we have consistently told the directors that this is what they would need to get. The schools are still asking also for information about when the students failed, what graduation group that they would be within. And from my understanding, there's still, legal issues of why we cannot give that information. And so this is still a concern that the schools have brought up to us. We looked at the LVN pass rate, and we looked at the last, since 2015 through 2017. Right now, we're sitting with a state pass rate of 71% of our LVNs pass the board. Our quarterly pass rate was 69%, which is really quite low. This, over the last 4 years, has fluctuated between 71 to 75% for our average annual. With our PTs, they're averaging between 69 and 76% for their pass rates. Preparation of the entry-level student was another discussion that we had. How do schools determine what an entry-level student should look like? And there was quite a variety from the SLE testing. Some of the schools accept a 15 for their entrance, where some of them go up to a 23 to 25. General consensus is 9th grade level education. They have to graduate from high school, but they have to have an understanding of in reading at 9th grade level. Some of the schools have prerequisites that they use, such as the anatomy and physiology, CNA, to look at the student and their learning abilities to find out if these students are going to be a better fit for their program. And some of them take whoever admits. So there is a wide variety. The consensus came out that each director should interview their students prior to the admission of a class, that they should set the standards so that they're accepting the better student instead of the students who really do not have the to be able to pass. If they can't pass the anatomy and physiology or a CNA course prior, then what do they need more tutoring and remediation before they would be accepted into a program? The program faculty, we asked if they felt that our regulations were strong enough with their program faculty. They did feel like this was something that they liked, but the one thing that they would like to see added was to make us more like the BRN, so that if someone was approved at one school, they would be able to carry this approval on to other schools. Program resources, all of the schools seem to have the same idea of what adequate resources were, which included adequate faculty, adequate facilities, support staff, simulation laboratories, skills labs, and computer labs. The sites it looks like that the LVNs are going to be working at mostly is the long-term care. Psychiatric technicians are looking at working in the mental health institutions, but it does look like they will be able to have the employment that there is a great need for the LVNPT.
Questions from the committee?
So thank you for your work on this. So what you're referring to in regards to the number of pass rate, it seems like we've had some low standards typically throughout our history, but it also seems like there's an opportunity for us to change that now. Can you go in a little bit about what other states have done and what those numbers look like, or do you not have that information?
I don't have that information with me. That's the next report that we're talking about. I do know that our pass rate, which is a range or a percentage of what all of the state schools are doing, is lower generally than the other states in the nation. The lowest other state that we found was 75% standard straight across the board, where we have the floating pass rate.
And then you said in regards to opportunities and jobs, are we finding that PTs have the same opportunities that they've had historically, or are there new locations that they're looking for jobs?
They're getting more positions out in the community because of the mental health hospitals that is being closed. They're losing their jobs in the mental health hospitals. And so we're finding more community-based facilities, more group homes that are taking care of these clients. And this is where the PTs are going to work.
As I recall, and by the way, thank you so much for making this composite, and to all of the staff that supported the data gathering sessions, as well as the public that went to those sessions, or else we wouldn't have any information here. We really did, and we need this kind of input ongoing. What started this inquiry was a directive to the Education Committee regarding the practice, the scope of practice for the preparation of future PTs and LVNs. Are there any recommendations at this point from staff regarding potential change to the practice and the preparation for those who would be prepared in the future? You know, we're in the 21st century, but we know we're marching forward decade by decade.
One of the things that we saw that was pretty glaring was the lack of ethics and soft skills. And we're thinking that this should be added a little more seriously to the curriculum, that we don't have any hours, or it can be just integrated throughout the program. But we may need to look at ethics, since the facilities were very concerned about the ethics and the communication abilities of the students and soft skills. We need to look at how our schools are working with that. Another thing that we saw was the need for possibly bringing back the preceptorship. And we do have in regulations the ability for preceptorship. And at our directors forum that we're having and presenting in February, we're going to be putting out some of the guidelines for the preceptorship and how to apply for the preceptorship programs.
Thank you. You also, if I heard correctly, there is a belief of there's a disconnect from theory to practice. Were there any recommendations that might be helpful to schools regarding the move from the classroom to out to the clinical?
We have not sat down and made any specific recommendations that we thought, as a group, we did not discuss that. I do believe that we need to make sure that there is a more connect between the theory and the clinical, and that the schools can really make sure that what they're teaching the student in theory is what they're doing that week in clinicals. I know that in many cases, specifically with our pediatrics and OB, that it gets spread out over a long period of time. So they may be talking about med-surg when they're really in clinicals for peds and OB because the peds and OB has finished. So we need to look at a way that the schools can legitimately get their peds and OB in while they're doing their peds and OB. And make sure that their clinicals do coincide with their theory.
As Ms. Gomez said, I'd like to address that disconnect that will be presented at the forum. I'm going to be presenting, we have gotten together, divided, on how to maybe work towards narrowing the disconnect. There many factors have led to that we found out at the meetings and in discussions. One is that the orientations that the facilities used to give to new grads, many of them are not doing the length of the orientation or minimum, or they're expecting them to come in and take full loads where they are graduating at an entry level with competencies. The next thing was that I looked to see how many of our schools had preceptorships, and there's very few of the LVN programs that have them, where the board has the guidelines and the regulations, and maybe there are many new directors that are not aware. So that's why we're presenting at the Directors Forum things, tips and guidelines and regulations that could assist in bridging that gap for the LVN graduate.
Other questions?
Going back to the idea of comparison and contrast of other states, how familiar are you with other states and their requirements for LVNs and at the college or the institutions
For admission?
for admissions? And
This is one thing that we have not surveyed the other states, is what the admission requirements are for students. We have surveyed them for their pass rates, but not for admission standards.
After the subcommittees and stuff, I was assigned to, because there was also the portion about us setting up a curriculum that had definite hours. And I started approaching some of the different boards, the schools. But having experience being an educator and a nurse in the East Coast, the Florida and all those states, and in Texas and their states, and here, a lot of the admissions that all the boards are requiring is the age, some type of entrance and preparation, basically is their age. And then that there be an admission process. They don't actually tell them what the admission, that's up to the school. But as they say, remember that when you're admitting students, you have to think of how they're going to go across and what type of students you're admitting so that they become successful at the end. And I saw that in Florida, in Texas, where I worked for 26 years, and here. There's a lot of similarities, and a lot of it is left to the discretion of what we do require is that they grant credit for CNAs, that they are 18 years of age, 17 years of age, that they are a graduate from a high school. That is consistent throughout all the states.
And in regards to preparation, though, within the coursework, how do you compare the states? And
The states that I have approached so far, and I will continue, they don't have set curriculums. Again, they use where they say this is the content. When you're going to write the program, you have to take the consideration as to what the NCLEX are, what your community you're serving, what your target audience is, what is the facilities that are available, and then you have to then decide how you're going to write. That's where many times we as NECs are supportive of the different schools when they ask us questions, because there is no cookie sheet that you can replicate so far between all the states or guidelines.
One thing, we did ask that question, it did come up at our sessions, and 6 schools did request that the board set a definite curriculum. All of the rest of the schools said, no, this would not work, because we each have different students. We have a different types of students in the different areas of the state, which is very true. And so I don't think that we would recommend at all to have a curriculum that was dictated by the board.
For instance, there's one school, this is how diverse they are. I have one school that really teaches a lot of OB, high risk and everything, where the scope of practice for the LVN is not necessarily in the high risk, but more in the normal, the maternity, the care of the child and everything else. So the contents is there. That's why you have to look at what are the NCLEX plans, not because you're teaching to the test, but because you're teaching to what is the content that we're focusing on as the scope of practice of the LVN and how you're functioning throughout the states. That's what the National State Board of Nursing does. So that's why we say that you have to look at the individual. What are the services? What is the community? In other words, an example, don't break the principle. If to do this way, that's what you have to learn. How do you apply it here when you're working these people? How do you apply it there? That's where that uniqueness comes in developing of the curriculum for the school and where they're at and the service they're providing to the public and the community.
thank you.
In your response, you reflected on the diversity of settings and schools. As we look at the future of healthcare delivery, and specifically healthcare delivered by PTs and LVNs, we recognize that here in California, the potential population needing health care is hugely, very, very diverse, not only racially, ethnically, but experience-wise, financially,
Absolutely.
abled, disabled.
Right.
How did that enter into the data being gathered?
You mean the data now or
No,
the data in the future?
the data that we collected.
Right.
Basically, when we ask information about the different ethnics, we generally got English as second language back as our comments regarding the different diversities. And where English as a second language needs to be addressed, it should be helped with tutoring. The schools should have a process if students are struggling to either assist them prior to admission or during the program to help them be able to understand the differences. There's very minute changes in our language that the students need to understand. And so there has to be a way, but when we were listening about diversity, primarily what we heard was English as second language and people talking with accents. And that was a real issue, is that people talking with accents, the instructors were talking with accents, the students were talking with accents, and were not being able to be understood. Accents are something that you can't really get around. People have accents, but even from the different areas in our country, we have different accents. But helping the students coming in who have English as a second language, the schools should have some way of helping these students, or either before or during the program, so that they are not just set aside and they blunder on their way through.
One of the things that when we asked that, we were hoping we would hear also, which we didn't, and which we also commented, we were laughing that when I started nursing, there was no transcultural content in the courses. And when I started teaching in 1978, where I was teaching, the staff nurses were having required to take a transcultural sensitivity course, and they were wondering why. And that's one of the things that we were trying to gather, is not just the language. As long as you can understand what the person means and you understand what they're saying to you so that you can follow with the right actions, when you're talking about transcultural and that diversity that we're talking about their beliefs, their traditions, how they treat the family, what medicines they use, and that is what we're discussing. And that was what we were trying to find out more about. What is the diversity of your students also, and assist them. That was not really obtained.
Because we as a board are charged with maintaining the public safety and the potential future clients or patients of LVNs and PTs are represented in the very diverse population of California. So part of that protecting their safety is ensuring that there are professionals who respect and understand the patients who are themselves culturally diverse. So if I'm hearing us correctly, that probably didn't get translated very well
No.
in the discussion.
No.
What I do hear, it was focused back on who are the students in the programs versus who will students.
They serve.
Okay, thank you so much. Part of what we do recognize as the mandate was, or interpret the mandate to the committee, was to make some recommendations about changes in the scope of practice. At this point, we have received your report and your comments about that. We really do appreciate it. It does not appear that at this point we have enough information to take action.
No.
We would really appreciate if you can provide us by our next education committee meeting some recommendations that we can chew on, if you please, that may have some effect on the scope of practice in terms of what will or what should future LVNs and future PTs need in order to ensure continuous public safety beyond the next 10 to 15 years.
All right. One scope of practice issue that did come up for the VNs was within working in hospice. VNs cannot pronounce death. And so this has become a huge issue for the LVNs being out in the field and being asked to take care of a patient who has just passed away and obtaining the pronouncement of death, calling the RN or the physician and getting the. So this is the one issue that hospice really has, is that the LVN themselves cannot pronounce death.
Thank you. Is there any public comment? Please approach. And if you don't mind, introduce yourself and please speak directly into the mic.
Hello, I'm Carrie Wybrew, Concord Career College, National Dean of Nursing for Practical and Vocational Nursing Programs. I work in 8 different states, and a couple of things. Sorry, I just was jumping around the room in the back. So now I'm out of breath. A couple of things. A lot of good points you made there. I don't even know if we could get to all of those this afternoon, really. One is that something that would really help schools on planning, and I know we've kind of beaten this to death, but, releasing, with graduate consent, but releasing graduates' names are essential to proper NCLEX action for the school. Every single other state that I operate in has given this information to us, except for California for our vocational nursing programs. And I work with Oregon, Florida, Texas, Colorado. All of them give it to us when we need to work on action planning, with the exception of the Vocational Nursing Board here. So I just have to tell you, it's like it's trying to work with your arms behind your back, you're blindfolded. I can't tell you how difficult that is. The mountain measurement is helpful, but it only tells you who tested in that quarter, but it doesn't give you any detailed information of from what cohort, nothing that will help you, except because it could have been from somebody that tested 5 years ago, a year ago. So nothing that really localizes where that person came from. Okay. Another thing, with regard to people with English as a second language, we need faculty on staff who represent, those, the student population that we're serving. So we need to continue to do things that help lift faculty. So we need more people coming into our nursing profession to help lift those, to move all different kinds of cultures and ethnicities to enter into nursing so that they can be educating the future nurses. So whatever we can be doing, and there's lots of different ways we can be doing that, but we need future nurses from all walks of life so that we can break down those barriers and have them educating the future nurses of America. That's a start. Besides all the little tests and everything else, we need nurses of all walks of life. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have referred that question about the pass rate information to legal. I don't know if we have any new information as of now. As I look to my left at legal counsel,
But whatever you can do would be surely appreciated.
That issue has been examined and re-examined. In California, we have the Information Practices Act that is different than what's in other states. It's a state law that governs the release of personally identifiable information collected by government agencies, and that's been interpreted to apply to the type of records we're talking about here with specific examination pass or fail information. So in order to release that information, there'd have to be a robust waiver signed by the examination taker, the examinee at the time of examination. And at this time, that is not in place. So there's not a mechanism that would allow the board to release that information to the stakeholders at this time without violating the Information Practices Act. That's been the consistent interpretation for some time.
Is there anything that would be in action to get that going? That we know of, to move forward? Because I don't know how many years we've really been asking. I know I've been working with this board for the last, and I can think of at least half those years we've been asking. I don't know, if you're raising the standard and you're asking for all those things, I'm all about it. But at the same time, then we need that information.
Thank you. We will continue to work with legal counsel. Any additional public comment? Please approach.
Jessica knows I can't stay quiet, so. My name is Dr. Shara Crary, and I am director of the Hayward Unitech campus. I just have a couple of comments on your presentation. Thank you for that. I have worked in Iowa and California as a nurse educator. I've also worked in Florida as a nurse. But I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things that I have noticed no matter where we work. You know, I've worked at the university level, the community college level, and now the private sector. We are seeing a lack of ability of our new students coming in to be able to critically think. A lot of what you are talking about in this report is critical thinking. The lack of ethics, that can be related directly back to some of their clinical judgment issues. The lack of preceptorship, which is great if you have the capability of doing preceptorships, but having run a preceptorship program for a university, it's very difficult to find enough spots when you have 30 students that you're trying to find, you know, a preceptor for. The disconnect from theory to practice, again, can be directly related back to critical thinking. Students are so focused on learning the specifics for the exam that they learn it for the exam and then they forget it because that's the way they're taught in school now. That's the way they're taught in the K through 12 programs. They learn it, then they forget it. Unfortunately, we're trying to reverse 12 years of that educational thought process in 11 months. And that is very, very difficult to do. Critical thinking, if you look at the research, is very difficult to teach after a certain age. So we can teach them how to process things, but the critical thinking of the past, of what, I'm sorry, most of us are a little bit seasoned, as I like to call it. The critical thinking of the past is just not available nowadays. So we have to figure out what we're going to do to help these students understand how to do appropriate clinical judgment. We have to teach them how to go through the steps of choosing right from wrong. I had a student in my office today that asked me a question that I shook my head on. Can't you just change the grade? You're the director. Can't you just change it? They don't see that as an issue. They don't see that as ethics. They just, they're so used to everybody gets the whole saying, everybody gets a ribbon, everybody, is accepted, everybody can do this. That goes back to the fact that we have a lack of critical thinking in the population that we're dealing with. So if we can come up with an idea on how to better help these students, I'm all for it. I've seen a lot of different entrance exams. I've seen a lot of different things happen, but the one thing I have seen work is focusing on using the topics that you're learning, the concepts that you're learning in theory, and directly relating them to clinical. That takes a lot of coordination and it takes a lot of clinical opportunities for these students, because we cannot have 12 students in one clinical group if you're going to be trying to focus in on making sure that the students get the education that they need. So when you have 12 students, and this is another thing that I had written down, more prep on giving meds to 10 to 15 patients, there's only one nurse that they're working with, only one instructor per clinical site, and they can have anywhere from 8 to 12 students. It might be great for a simulation, but I do not believe that that is an appropriate action for a faculty member in a clinical site, nor would I recommend it. Because what are they going to do with the other 11 students while they're passing meds to 10 to 15 patients? So that being said, I just really think that one of the things, I guess my main point of coming up here is I know Jessica and I have had this conversation. It's a different group of students. I'm not saying that they can't do it. I'm just saying we have to focus in on something a little bit different. That I really think that we need to focus in on clinical judgment versus the critical thinking. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, Board. I'm Casey Gibson, Program Director at Unitech College for the VN program. I have been Director of Programs in Illinois, Indiana, and in Georgia previous to coming here to California. And the California Board is different. I've experienced it over the past 4 years since being here. Releasing the names, whatever, I just want to be an advocate for that, and I want it noted because releasing the names would give us the opportunity to really help those students if they have not passed. And so if we know who they are, because they don't always keep in contact with us, then we can help them to be successful and find out where their deficit is, because obviously something was missed. I don't know, and I'm not, trying to compare or how it happened, but whatever the BRN is doing, maybe we could do the same thing in the VN program so that we can give these students an opportunity so that we can search them out and help them beyond all of our other efforts in trying to figure out who did what, when, trying to keep up with our board scores, and things of that nature. So I know you're working on it, and I hope you continue to revisit and revisit and revisit again until we can all be happy and on the same page. The other thing I wanted to focus on is the amount of students that are in a clinical setting. Just to reiterate what the previous speaker said, it's difficult to we all can admit here, at least the seasoned people can, the seasoned people, we can all agree that this is a different generation that we're educating. They came here with phones and laptops in their hands. And so having 12 students or more, which is often the case in a VN program, it's not conducive for learning. For a person, one person may catch it, but the other one, you're going to miss something. And they all deserve an equal amount of time. So I think that probably needs to be better regulated or something of that nature, because it's difficult to maintain 12 students in a scenario such as what we've been faced with here in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary McHugh from Angeles College in Los Angeles. And I conceptually put together what my colleagues have said with, what the research is saying. But I'm also kind of an old lady, which means I've been around, I've been a nurse for over 40 years. And I will say that when we were new grads, there were complaints that the new grads of today, quote, quote, they don't know how to nurse when they come out the way we did. That's the old guys from when I was a young nurse. And a piece of what this problem is, what the agencies really would like is for us to provide them with experienced nurses. It's not possible with a new grad. When I was a new grad, I can remember things that I missed the significance of that I would never miss today. So a piece of that is just the state of humanity, that we aren't born with experience. And by the time we get experience, some people say we're almost too old to use it. But that said, I will also say we are in education, not only in nursing, but both of my sons are engineers, and it's the same in engineering. We are dealing with a different generation. When I grew up, the smartphone was not even a gleam in Bill Gates' eyes. He wasn't even in business. He was probably running around playing ball or something. The research that I've seen suggests also is that the TV generation, we didn't have TV in my house till I was 12 years old. So I was already pretty old before I was exposed. And at that time, TV didn't do some of the things it does now. The research that I was reading not too long ago in terms of children growing and the cognitive damage that's happening. If you look at TV, the scene changes a minimum of about every 5 to 10 seconds. That affects the attention span of young children growing up. So we're having problems with our students with attention span, and that will yield communication problems. I do understand the issue of accents. I'm not quite sure how America is going to solve that. That's an American problem right now, and it's one of our strengths, but one of our challenges. So I understand what some of the concerns of the employment agencies are. The first half of my career, I was a hospital nurse, and I was a staff nurse, a charge nurse, a head nurse, and then a director of nursing. So, I was the one on the other side saying, gee, we would like better new grads. What we really need, and I don't know how to get it, is a collaboration between the clinical facilities and the schools in providing opportunities for new grads to get the kind of training that, say, new doctors get, that new engineers often get in terms of a residency or an internship year. That would certainly help, but it's not really an option right now. And the other piece that I am concerned about is when I'm dealing with students today, I'm dealing with people who don't have a lot of money. And all of the things that we talk about adding a preceptorship, somebody has to pay for that. The research shows the highly successful preceptorships were funded research grants, so neither the hospital nor the student paid for it. But then in many cases, when the hospital has to take it over, it kind of falls apart because they would rather not pay preceptors while they're learning to be good. And yet, after they've graduated, within 6 months, the students have to start repaying their loans, so they have to get a paycheck. So I would hope we would take account of all of those concerns, because I don't see government suddenly getting a lot of money to provide more funding for tuition and loans and education. But I just wanted to share some of the research that I've been reading around some of these issues. Sorry, I wish I had solutions.
Thank you very much. We're going to close public comment. Thank you again to staff. Do you have a closing remark for us?
The only remark I have is that we will have some recommendations for scope of practice for the BVNPT for the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks to staff for all of their hard work in collecting this data, and particularly to the stakeholders for being willing to participate. It was incredibly fruitful, wonderful. We'll move on to the next agenda item. And we request that staff approach. This is a discussion and possible action to make recommendations to the board regarding regulation changes relative to pass rates. This has been discussed several times in previous committee meetings. The board has endorsed a willingness to set a fixed pass rate. In order to do that, it will require some changes to the statute. Please introduce yourself. Thank you. I've been corrected. It is not statute, it is a regulation change. Thank you, Council.
Brian Vu, Enforcement Division Chief.
Jessica Gomez, Nursing Education Consultant.
Geraldine Maracino, Education Analyst.
So as the chair stated at the November board meeting, the board had made a motion to address one component of the actual regulation. The regulation itself is broken into two parts. One is a minimum, meeting the minimum pass rate. The second is for the duration of it. The board made a motion on that November board meeting to accept a 75% pass rate. However, tasked and provided a mandate to the education committee to engage stakeholders to see and provide an equitable amendment to the regulation and present it to at the next board meeting. So at this time, we've done our board staff, Geraldine, Jessica, NECs have done due diligence to see what is the most equitable solution that would take into account regular programs, irregular programs, that would be fair all across the board. So board staff has provided a few options of verbiage and wanted to run it by the committee for their feedback.
Board staff recommends implementation of option 1 on the revised language.
Would you talk directly into the mic?
On the report,
Thank you.
on the report that you have before you, we have 3 revised language options, and the board staff recommends implementation of option 1 for various reasons. One being that, I might want to read the option 1, right? So the option 1, the current language reads, failure to maintain the required yearly average minimum pass rate for 2 years or 8 consecutive quarters may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. Our option 1 revised language that we recommend would read, failure to maintain the required pass rate percentage for 1 year or the four most recent quarters in which the program had first-time test takers may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. That is what board staff would like to recommend.
With this, we're not looking at 4 consecutive quarters at 75%. We're looking at 4 quarters that have pass rate totals. This would take into consideration some of our programs who start a class and then 18 months later graduate a class, and they've had no graduates in between that period of time. So they've had no pass rates. So let's say their last time they had a graduate test, they may have had 14 out of 15 students test the first time and pass, but then the next test they may have had 1 student test and not pass. So that would leave them with a 0 pass rate out in the 4th quarter. So by eliminating the quarters that they do not have pass rates, we're not going to be artificially hurting or helping any programs. Every quarter for the program would stand on its own.
Question from committee? Thank you. Want to continue, please?
It's important to provide the information concerning this option 1, as said, failure to maintain the required pass rate percentage 1 year or the 4 most recent quarters in which the program had first-time test takers may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. It's important to mention that board recommends that to count the 4 most recent quarters.
I'm not sure everyone can hear you in the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. Should I repeat from the beginning?
If you just,
Okay.
that's better,
It's
thank you.
important to mention that the board recommends with this option number 1 to not take the average of the 4 quarters of the most recent test takers, first-time test takers. This would be a little bit different because most states will usually take 4-quarter averages. That's similar to what we see on the NCLEX examination provided to us annually by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. However, in this scenario, the board would like to recommend counting the number of times in the 4 quarters that they were in compliance, the program, under this revised language.
Do you want to review the options?
Okay. Option number 2, failure to maintain the required pass rate percentage for 1 year or 4 consecutive quarters may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. Option 3, failure to maintain the required pass rate percentage in a calendar year may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. Those were the other 2 options that we were considering, but the board staff does recommend option number 1. And for the reasons as follows, this new language of option number 1 would hold vocational nursing and PT programs to a consistently higher pass rate standard than the current regulations. Programs would be required to maintain pass rate percentages of at least 75% every quarterly period of time. This is in strong contrast to comparable states that calculate program pass rate percentages of at least 80% based on 1 year period of time. After the recommended revised language would be in place, the implementation would occur and the new regulation, the implementation of the new regulations, VNPT programs, regardless of their approval status, would be given a period of 2 years to reach compliance. Thereafter, the new regulations would apply. Another point brought up was there would be no need for grandfathering in, as all VNPT programs, including those on provisional status, would have the first 2 years to reach compliance. Board staff also recommends implementation to begin after the first quarter, after the regulation is enacted, and monitoring of the outcomes to be ongoing.
While the board has provided a few recommendations, I do believe that the common concern is chiefly that California has consistently been having the lowest pass rates for the past 10 years, which is a concern. We believe that a regulation change is necessary to align and provide integrity to the board for keeping and upholding its mission of protecting California and its Californians. So we've provided a few recommendations and why we believe the first one is the most beneficial. However, we believe that we should open this to the stakeholders to kind of get input to see what their feedback may be.
So we heard you correctly, you're seeking stakeholders' feedback, or you've already received it?
Looking at the minutes for the November board meeting, I believe that was a mandate given by the full board, was
Right.
for the education committee to consult with stakeholders.
Just wanted to make sure.
Correct.
Is that the end of your report?
Yes, that is the end.
Okay, thank you. Committee questions?
Not a question, more of a statement. I just think it's more than a concern. It's unacceptable. And I just think California leads the way in so many ways. And this particular standard, we have allowed ourselves as a state to have lower standards in comparison to other states. And I think that it's our responsibility as board members, as well as this board, to make sure that we have the best of the best moving forward for the consumers of California. So thank you for the work that you've done.
I believe the most important thing too is, in the days of symbiotic relationship between the board and the academic institutions, if they're not meeting certain standards, it provides a mechanism for the board to provide assistance to get them to align and comply with our current rules and regulations. So there is benefit with a proposed change.
Thank you. We do really appreciate the time staff put in to prepare this for us and the research you've done. Thank you very much. The option that you recommend, actually of the three, appears to be the best of the three. And your comment, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase, enacting or that recommendation of that particular language really does least or no harm to existing programs, and which the other side of the argument does not help either. It is neutral. And that's really a challenge oftentimes, to find language that is neutral. So thank you for that work. We will, do we have a motion to accept this? Or do we need further information?
I move that we accept option number 1.
And I will second that, which puts a motion on the floor, and we will accept public comment. And if you please approach, and we'll give you a chance to get to a mic. As staff, if you'll allow them to get to a mic, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great to see us moving forward. The only thing is now I just hope urgently and expeditedly behind that we move to one of the comments that I was making earlier, which is get us names. That's the thing right behind this, because any nurse educator knows what we need to be able to make the right actions behind that. If a program gets in trouble and you have to make the right actions, you need to be able to be real detailed in your reports to be able to make the right actions behind that. That's all that I want to say about that. But absolutely, as a person who does those kinds of reports, California is the #1 state that blows everybody away in the number of vocational nurses. There is nobody who even comes close. And so it hurts to look at statistics that show that we don't fare so well in our pass rates. So we want to look great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good
Rolando
afternoon.
Chico, Assistant Dean for Unitech College. It is indeed, and we had a meeting about this yesterday within our ranks, and it is indeed important. I think not only for the profession, but for our patients to have these passing percentages, mandatory passing percentages increased. However, one of the language that I heard here is no need for grandfathering in. For small campuses in which there are only 3 or 4 students that are taking that exam, and you have somebody that graduated a year ago and taking that exam and failing, it affects their passing rates. Number 2, you do not know who that person is because of the fact that we are not given any information with regards to graduation dates, nor the names of the individuals that haven't taken the test or have taken the test and have failed. It is essential. We believe that a 75% will be a cap, a minimum. As I've said, it's good for our profession, it's good for our state, but yet there has to be regulation on the time allotted for test takers. It's either after 6 months, if they haven't taken the exam, they go back and take a refresher course and not be allowed by the board to take that exam. And of course, and I agree with my colleagues here, we need information. We need to know who these students are that are taking the test, who these students are that have not taken the test. In Unitech College, we have placed extensive trackers. We have placed whole departments calling these students every day. We have our trackers. And recently, we received our passing percentages from the board. No matter how I look at those sheets, I cannot make a correlation. I just can't. I tried, and at least in the past 1.5 years, being in this position, I have tried. I can't. Therefore, we need help from the board. This is good. We like it, but we need you to help us as well. So you've mentioned that BVNPT, there is this thing wherein these informations cannot be given. But the Board of Registered Nursing are giving these information. And there is a correlation to that one because of the fact that, at least for our RN program in Unitech, we were at 84% because of the fact that that department was given names of the people that haven't tested. We focus on them, we help them, we call them every day. We are now at 94%. There is a correlation. This is good, but please help us. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have some handouts. May I pass those out to?
Absolutely. I do have one. Thank you. nursing board, or maybe they're out of compliance.
I'm Mary McHugh, and although I am a director of a school, I'm here as the president of the Vocational Nursing Directors of Southern California. There's about 100 of us. We have had multiple meetings. Actually, after the last board meeting, when Dr. Bassett de Martinez asked stakeholders to consider and give some thoughts to the board. So we have had the meetings. And this handout does represent our thinking. The way we looked at this is we wanted to figure out what the goals should be and then figure out what actions might be taken. So this particular paper looks at 3 major goals in relation to getting the pass rate up, because that is what we want. So the first goal obviously is improve the statewide NCLEX first attempt pass rate to a minimum of 75%. And ideally, we'd like to see the state go higher. Just because you have a minimum doesn't mean you can't and shouldn't aim much higher. We think some actions that will significantly and quickly move us towards these goals are, first of all, require graduates to test within 3 months of graduation from their program. The board did provide us information at the last board meeting that this is an action that at least 1 or 2 other states have already taken. And why would we do that? Well, first of all, from the National Council and from multiple research studies that we have found online or through the literature review, we have found that consistently a graduate's highest probability of passing the NCLEX is if they take it immediately after graduation and no longer than 3 months. The virtual ATI, which runs probably the most successful NCLEX prep course, insists that their guarantee only works if the graduate takes it actually within 2 weeks of completing this particular review. Although we provide at our expense, right? Instead of keeping it as profit, we spend the money, the $300 or $400 per student, that we provide that to all of our students as part of their last term. Failing NCLEX is damaging to the graduate. First of all, they can't go out and practice. Within 6 months, they have to start paying back their loans. And if within 6 months they have that license, right now all of our grads are getting jobs. So getting a job and getting that higher salary, right now, at least in Los Angeles, is not a problem. We're finding, I think at one point a few months ago, we looked to try and find the number of advertisements, and we found like 100 in a week. So there are plenty of positions out there. Now, the problem that we're running into, and this is in part because we're a very culturally diverse city. You know, in fact, I think California and New York maybe are the 2 most culturally diverse states in the union. It turns out that there are some students who mistakenly believe that they should wait and maybe do a little more study. And at one meeting of the board where we had a directors conference, I remember one of the directors who had been asked by the board to speak said that what she was finding was that particularly her Asian immigrant students believed that they needed to wait and study some more, and then they failed. My school is in the middle of Koreatown, so we do serve a large number of immigrant students, and we see exactly the same thing. The ones who take it immediately as we advise, all pass. The ones who wait 4, 5, 6 months, very few pass. So we're looking at this not only as something that will help the schools get higher pass rates for their students, this is good for the graduates. It gives them their highest probability of being successful immediately, getting their license, and moving their lives to a higher plane because they now have a useful educational skill. Second, consider the possibility of perhaps requiring schools to pay the fees, the 150, well, it's what it is right now, the 150 board application fee and the $200 Pearson VUE. Pretty much most of our schools are already doing this, so it's not going to be a change for very many schools. The rationale is that the directors state that their schools moved to doing this because many of their students who were delaying were just so out of money by the time they graduated that they could not get that money together. And then by the time they worked 3, 6, 9 months at minimum wage to get the money together and support themselves, now they couldn't pass. And schools can include that as either a graduation fee or as part of last term tuition, so that students who are loan eligible can actually get loans, because the loans will cover formal catalog student school fees. Third, require the schools to use the BREEZE system. I know right now some schools are still doing it by hand, but we, in Southern California, we are finding BREEZE to be extremely valuable. We applaud the board highly for implementing this. It has shortened the time between submission of documents and the graduate's receipt of their ATT. In some cases, we're seeing students get it back as fast as 2 weeks. So it really is highly successful. Require the graduates who miss that 3-month deadline to obtain verification from their school that they've remediated and are ready to pass NCLEX. And we provide our students with, like I said, the virtual ATI. Virtual ATI, it's $75 to reactivate it and get them started again. So we pay that for our grads who, for whatever reason, delay. If, of course, they come back to us instead of just testing without remediating. But again, it doesn't help the student to pay those fees and then fail, because every time they take Pearson VUE, they have to pay another $200. And these are students who are minimum wage eligible without this license that they've trained for. The other great advantage, and we're looking at goal 2 now, which is to protect the safety and welfare of California citizens who are the recipient of the nursing care provided by California's VN graduates. In terms of limiting the time, we have one director who has a graduate who graduated 20 years ago, and instead of taking the NCLEX, went into the father's business of some kind. I can't remember what it was, but it was nothing to do with like dry cleaning or something. And the business went bankrupt and now wants to come back and take the NCLEX without remediation 20 years later. This is not safe for California citizens. It is simply asking for, if the person by some chance passes, all the NCLEX can test is cognitive knowledge. And they can go through virtual ATI or some reviews perhaps and pass it. But they will not have any ability to do procedures in a safe and competent manner. And I certainly wouldn't want to be the recipient of that person's care, nor would any of us want our family members or ourselves. We also think that any graduate who has not passed the NCLEX within 5 years of graduation really needs to go back to school. Now, whether that's start from scratch and go back to school all over as Texas requires, or whether that should be some kind of an intensive renewal program, I think that probably needs further discussion. But the reality is medical science and nursing science are changing so rapidly that even 5 years out, the changes in the medications, in the technology, in the available treatments, and in the nursing care is so great that this person may be practicing 1990s nursing in a 2018 patient. And we do not think that is safe for the citizens of California who need nursing care. On our third goal, assisting existing approved VN and PT schools to meet the requirements of the new regulation. Does this apply to PT schools or just VN schools?
Both.
Both, okay. And I think this is fairly similar to what the NEC's have already recommended. We felt that there should be a 2-year transition, that during the transitions that we provide, we realize that the NEC's excellent help, really strong support, but we don't have 100 of them. And so the vocational nursing directors of Southern California are willing to offer to supplement and provide some free counseling and assistance to schools that are low and need it, if that is something that the NECs feel might be of some value. And we have directors there who have some very high pass rates. So we're willing to provide a list of VN directors who are willing to provide assistance. We also, although we agree with the NECs that we don't want one standard curriculum, that doesn't allow for the rapid change, because then you'd have to have regulatory change to even implement, say, a new treatment that didn't exist at the time the regulation was passed. But we would like to work with the NECs to develop some sample curricula or curricula templates. Several of our members are curricular experts. I used to teach curriculum development, and we have other people who have. So we are willing to work together with the board to develop some templates that people could look at and use pieces of, or however they might want to use it. And we are also available to offer workshops to schools on strategies that have been proven to help raise pass rates. So if any of those offers are helpful, the VNDS really is committed to working with the board to improve nursing in California. Thank you.
Thank you. I am calling for a motion to receive and file this report.
So moved.
Now second it. Is there any discussion? Public comment about this motion? The motion is to receive the report and file it. Call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye. Other public comment.
Again, my name is Dr. Crary, and I am up here speaking for myself. I'm not representing my employer right now. They don't know I'm going to say this. So, don't fire me, boss. All right. This is one of my soapbox issues, the pass on the NCLEX. I am sitting here as a registered nurse with over 20 years of experience. I failed the NCLEX on the first try. I will tell students that left and right. Passing the NCLEX is not indicative of your success or the safety you provide to patients once you do pass the NCLEX. The NCLEX is an exam. Students are taught from the day they start kindergarten how to pass exams. This is not telling us or protecting the safety of our citizens of the state of California. That being said, I understand that we have to have something to assess these students coming out of school. My recommendation is that we look at something beyond what other states are doing. Let's look at these students and really look at how they learn and how they perform. We can have students that do not do well on exams, but you take them to clinical and they are amazing nurses. So why are we following the examples of other boards and not saying, let's add a hands-on section to this to make sure that our students are going to be safe for patients? Let's look beyond what other people are recommending and come up with something that's unique for the state of California. So, and adding that hands-on portion for safety, you can require exit exams when students leave the schools. but then require them to take, pass the hands-on first, then go and take the NCLEX. But use it as a combined system to ensure the safety of the citizens of the state of California. Statistically, if you look at the NCLEX, it doesn't tell you the capability of that student. You're assessing their minimal base knowledge. You can get on there and do some of those practice exams and click on the side of the abdomen where you would expect them to have pain if they have this diagnosis. In reality, would you actually be able to assess that on a patient? I'm just asking for you to think outside of the box. Let's go back and really look at this and say, is this something that we can lead the country on instead of following, and saying, let's look at maybe adding a hands-on portion to this to give some of these students that maybe English is a second language, they have a difficult time reading some of these questions, that they might be able to get some traction to say, you know what, I passed this portion, I passed my hands-on portion, I've got this, I know how to do this, and it's going to give them the boost they need to pass the actual exam. The other thing that I wanted to say, and again, I'm up here for myself, is stop punishing the schools for the students' decisions. I am the first one to admit I made a huge mistake when I took my NCLEX exam. I had my first child on Friday, took a final exam on Monday, and then 2 Mondays later, I went and took my NCLEX. It was not the appropriate time for me to take the NCLEX. But students do that. They don't look at the things that are going to affect their capabilities of passing these exams. And truly, yes, we pay for it. We say, okay, we'll pay for this $150 fee if you follow our process, but students don't have to do that. They can go off on their own once they graduate and take the test whenever they want, if they have that ATT. So they may not be making the best decisions. It's just like having my son in college. I can make all kinds of recommendations to him, but does he actually follow what I say? Probably not. So what I'm just asking you is to consider the fact that students have the capability of going and doing these things on their own, but maybe we shouldn't put so much pressure on them to pass this on the first try. We do put a lot of pressure on students to pass this exam on the first try. We also put a lot of pressure on the schools to say, this is your benchmark of success. This is your benchmark of saying you're a quality school. I disagree with that, respectfully disagree with that, saying that students who have the capability, yes, they've passed our schooling, to come back 2 years later and we are judged on them passing after 2 years of this education, being out of their head. We're being judged on that, and that's truly unfair. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to close public comment. Any additional questions or concerns for staff? An observation. This is really very helpful, having the options and particularly understanding the rationale you used to come to your recommendation. We've received some additional input from our stakeholders, and while some of it is not necessarily what should be added in terms of changing the regulation, we surely want to see how we can roll this out. In other words, how do we help schools move to this, assuming we are successful with all of the work that has to do with changing the current to the new. And of particular concern, at least to this board member, would be the timing of testing from completion of the program. This is truly something that happens in other licensure procedures. And some guidelines or some way to ensure that the majority, if not all, of future testers do it within a reasonable time after successfully, we're going to leave it to the schools to determine whether they complete the program or not, as we always have. But after their successful completion of the program. So there would be something indicating, and we already get something through Breeze, but maybe there might be something else added to it. I'm not sure what it would look like at this moment that says this person is ready to test if the testing is done within the next X period of time. Because the fact they complete the program is one thing. But if they don't do it within that period of time, at this moment, we don't have and I'll use the term gate, that would keep them from testing at some other time. So in a sense, this gives schools voice in terms of the testee. Any other comments? Thank you, staff. You're always on your toes. You must not sleep. You must do this work 24 hours a day. Wow, it's amazing, and we appreciate it. All right, next agenda item. Yes, sir. Thank you. I have been advised we have the opportunity, if we so choose, to table the question because there's more information. We did ask for public comment for what was on the floor. I'm looking at the motion maker because.
I make that motion right now, so we can move forward.
Thank you, and I would second it. I think with the new information that we have, it would be important to add that as part of the consideration. It does not necessarily, but it could. It doesn't necessarily affect the writing of the regulation, but we want to make sure if there is a possibility that we only submit it once.
I make an addendum to that as well. I do believe that the last speaker, I'm sorry, what was the last speaker's name, from Monrovia or Hayward? From Hayward, correct? Should actually, those comments should also be considered as we move forward into the document as well.
If we can, if we get them in writing.
I can send those to you.
Thank you. Well, we keep moving down our agenda.
Madam Chair, actually, if I could ask you,
Yes, please.
could we clarify this a bit procedurally? As the committee's recommendation, had you approved the language for the regulation, would have been approved by the full board next month. How would you like to proceed? Would you like to have an augmented discussion based on the information today at the full board, or would you like to defer it to a future education committee and a commensurately later board meeting? Or would you like to just think on that for a bit? But procedurally for the staff, we would like to know how to proceed and how to incorporate the stakeholder input, possibly cast a net a little bit wider too.
Because there was not a full recommendation or action on the recommendation, at the upcoming February board meeting, we will update them by giving them a summary of what's happened and why it's being delayed. And if by any chance there's been an additional report available or additional information into the report, we would share that with the board. But the understanding would be it would still come back through the education committee with the recommendation from this committee, as we have been charged,
Certainly.
to the board.
Understood.
And so when we do not have a recommendation directly to them, when they might anticipate one, we do explain why we do not have one at that time. It doesn't happen often, it's rare, but when we get the kind of input from our stakeholders, it's really important to us that we incorporate it.
I agree.
And thank you for the
certainly.
question.
Certainly, and like I said, you're absolutely correct. It's a very important motion. Putting forward regulations, we don't want to do it more than once, and so to do it correctly the first time, like taking a test. Thank you. We'll work with our stakeholders and with the committee to prepare for a discussion, in next month, and then back to the education committee for the next meeting.
And again, it would be more a report
Yes,
to the board, and because they have charged us
Certainly.
with bringing language for regulation change.
all right. Thank you.
Next item, suggestions for future agenda items. And I turn to my colleague. We definitely will be putting this particular item on our next agenda. Is there anything else that comes to mind? I do know, and I'm looking at our NECs, that there have been proposed changes in NCLEX, and we'd like an update on that, if you please, because potentially there might be, I'm not sure, but I've understood there might be some practice components incorporated in the new test, so we all want to hear about that. And we'd also like to ask legal counsel to continue review of release of names and to report back to this committee on that status to see if there's anything, any pathway or option to assist our stakeholders with the information they have been requesting. Thank you, counsel, who volunteered to do that.
Thank you very much.
Well, believe it or not, we are at the end of our agenda. Again, to our stakeholders, we can't do this work without you. We want you to know we appreciate the fact that you speak with us and to us. We do listen. We might not be able to do everything you would wish us to, but we do understand. So please keep coming and keep speaking. Again, a big thank you to the staff. Again, you are part of this puzzle, and we will not be whole without you. I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved?
Second, and I don't think it calls for a vote. You may vote with your feet. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.